Dr. Anthony Fauci has enjoyed great respect as a scientist, one of the U.S.'s longest tenured public servants, and the single highest paid federal employee. But this exchange reflected his apparent naivete about the People's Republic of China.
Dr. Fauci, I believe you have testified that you didn't give any money to the Wuhan lab to conduct gain-of-function research. Is that right?
That is correct.
How do you know they didn't lie to you?
Excuse me, sir?
How do you know they didn't lie to you and use the money for gain-of-function research anyway?
There's no way of guaranteeing that, but in our experience with grantees, including Chinese grantees, which we've had interactions with for a very long period of time, they're very competent, trustworthy scientists.
Since that exchange, a tranche of Dr. Fauci emails obtained through a Freedom of Information request has been made public. They raise troubling questions about whether Fauci's public statements are at odds with what he knew privately. In one email to Fauci dated January 31st, 2020, examining the clues to the virus's origin, a scientist writes, quote, "One has to look really closely at the sequences to see that some of the features potentially look engineered." It goes on to note the virus's genome is, quote, "inconsistent with expectations from evolutionary theory." In another email from Peter Daszak, president of EcoHealth Alliance, a New York-based nonprofit through which NIH money was sent to the Wuhan lab to fund SARS-CoV research, Daszak thanks Fauci, quote, "I just wanted to say a personal thank you on behalf of our staff and collaborators for publicly standing up and stating that the scientific evidence supports a natural origin for COVID-19 from a bat to human spillover, not a lab release from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Your comments are brave, and coming from your trusted voice will help dispel the myths being spun around the virus." Part of that email is redacted, citing law enforcement exemptions, a redaction that piqued the curiosity of one lockdown skeptic who tweeted, "Hi, Peter Daszak. In the interest of transparency, would you please reveal what the redacted material here was and the nature of the law enforcement proceeding? Thanks." In May of 2020, Daszak was near certain in a 60 Minutes interview that COVID-19 came from the wild and not from a lab.
Well, I'm a scientist, and what I do is I look at the evidence around a hypothesis. There is a huge amount of evidence that these viruses repeatedly emerge into people from wild animals in rural areas through things like hunting and eating wildlife. There is zero evidence that this virus came out of a lab in China.
But in 2019, Daszak spoke at a conference about the common practice of gain-of-function research on coronaviruses originating in bats from southern China.
You can manipulate them in the lab pretty easily. It's just spike protein drives a lot of what happens with the coronavirus, zoonotic risk. So you can get the sequence, you can build the protein, and we work with Ralph Barrick at UNC to do this. Insert it into a backbone of another virus and do some work in the lab. So you can get more predictive when you find a sequence. You've got this diversity. Now, the logical progression for vaccines is if you're going to develop a vaccine for SARS, people are going to use, pandemic SARS as
sure.
But let's try and insert some of these other related and get a better vaccine.
Well, I mean, I've worked in intelligence operations for a large part of my career. I mean, lots of people are told to do certain things. Can you trust these scientists? I don't trust these scientists right now. I trust our national lab scientists. I trust our Army scientists. I don't trust these paid in the pocket by Chinese scientists.
In another email from February 5th, 2020, Fauci responds to an email from Obama-era HHS Secretary Sylvia Burwell, now the president of American University, in which she asks about pending travel and if she should wear a mask. Fauci responds, quote, "Masks are really for infected people to prevent them from spreading infection to people who are not infected, rather than protecting uninfected people from acquiring infection. The typical mask you buy in a drugstore is not really effective in keeping out virus, which is small enough to pass through the material. It might, however, provide some slight benefit in keeping out gross droplets if someone coughs or sneezes on you. I do not recommend that you wear a mask, particularly since you're going to a very low-risk location." In another email written in March of 2020, just as businesses and schools were shuttering and lives were being upended, University of Pennsylvania researcher Michael Betts pleads with Fauci, quote, "We know the virus is dangerous to the old and or immunosuppressed. In my opinion, we should be focusing our efforts on keeping that group from being infected, sort of a reverse quarantine. The problem right now is that the media has created a panic. Why aren't the demographics being released? To everyone besides the endangered group, this virus is literally less dangerous than the flu. Please tell me what you think. Fauci responds, "Thank you for your note." The release of the new Fauci email correspondence has turbocharged the call for congressional investigations, but they're unlikely to happen in the present Congress.
But you know how many hearings Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats who run the House of Representatives have had? In the words of Dean Wormer from Animal House, 0.0. That's how many hearings. And that's unacceptable.
In a tweet, frequent Fauci critic Senator Rand Paul said, "Told you, #fire Fauci." In a separate tweet, he said Fauci was a massive fraud. The newly released trove of emails to and from Dr. Fauci makes that abundantly clear, he said. Late Wednesday, Amazon and Barnes & Noble had removed Fauci's new book entitled Expect the Unexpected from their online listings. On at least 2 other occasions, Fauci forwarded a scientific paper to colleagues on gain-of-function research into the SARS virus. It's the kind of stuff that, as one critic noted, if you tried to publish it on Facebook or on Twitter, you might get blocked or slapped with a warning label. Doug McKelway for the Washington Examiner.